Hello everybody and welcome back to Learn Hittite. Now, as some of you may know, I am fascinated and some would say obsessed with Hittite language and the Indo-European Anatolian languages in general. Now, imagine my excitement when I discovered that there is an uncategorized Indo-European language that some linguists actually attribute to the Anatolian branch of the Indo-European tree. Well, upon discovering this information, it set off for me an exciting few days journeying down the rabbit hole of article, citation, to book, to another citation in order to find out as much as I could about this language and actually for me to come up with my own conclusion about whether there is any validity to try and attribute this language to the Anatolian branch of Indo-European. Now, regardless of my conclusions and the outcome, it was an interesting and fascinating experience to learn something about this, for me, completely new language. And here today, I'm going to share that journey with you. So let's jump right into it. The location of today's video is the island of Sicily between the 7th and 4th centuries BCE. And it is believed to have been divided amongst three distinct groups, each with their own language: the Sicel, the Sican and the Elymian languages. The Elymians occupied the western part of the island, while their neighbours to the east were the Sicani, and further east were the Sicels. Distinguishing these groups in the archaeological record is challenging, and linguistically it's not much clearer. The Sican language is traditionally considered non-Indo-European, but to be honest, due to the limited number of Sican texts, its true nature remains a mystery. The Elymian and Sicel languages are assumed to be Indo-European, but again their exact placement on the Indo-European tree and their relationship to each other are subjects of ongoing debate, primarily due to the frustratingly small corpus of language material. It may in fact be possible that the Sicel and Sican languages are ultimately related, and very recent yet promising research seems to suggest a connection between Sicel and Latin, therefore tentatively placing it on the Italic branch of the Indo-European tree. So of the approximately 1,300 archaic inscriptions from Sicily, about 1/3 are in Elymian and about 1/5 are in the Sicel language. Now, regarding the Sican language, it's difficult to give you an exact number of inscriptions, but the number is going to be very small because most of the Sican inscriptions are names, and it's actually difficult to differentiate a Sicel from a potentially Sican inscription. And so I haven't counted those in the numbers that I've just given you. The rest of the inscriptions are actually in Greek. In antiquity, Thucydides considered the Elymians to be barbarians, albeit of noble stock, because they were thought to be descendants of Troy. Hellenicus was a little bit more indifferent towards the origin story of the Elymians, merely claiming that they were from somewhere else in Italy. The Elymians are, however, credited with founding two cities in Sicily, Segesta and Erice. So let's take a look at what we know about the Elymian language from the literature and try to deduce its likely place on the Indo-European tree. We have approximately 440 texts attributed to the Elymians, many of which are found on coins or vase inscriptions. The Elymians employed the Greek alphabet to represent their language, most likely adopting the alphabet and coinage through various intermediaries alongside the Greek colonies on Sicily itself. As a result, we see substantial variation in alphabets and writing styles. This is further complicated by the fact that the Elymians presumably lacked a scribal school in their society to standardise forms. Nevertheless, the Elymian alphabet appears to have the closest affinities with the scribal traditions of Selinus, a Greek colony on the south coast of Sicily that bordered Elymian territory. Greek sources mention relatively few conflicts with the Elymians, suggesting a cordial relationship, reinforced by the evident influence of the Selinus colony on Elymian epigraphy. Now, that's not to say that there wasn't conflict, because the historical record definitely says that there was, and when it kicked off, well, It was a doozy, with far-reaching consequences for all actors involved. But also in the historical record, we know of periods of cooperation and tranquility. Throughout the years, Elymian has been linked with various language families. Early scholars like Kinch in 1888 proposed connections to Anatolian and Armenian, while later scholars like Durante and Ambrosini observed potential links to Anatolian and Balkan languages. Schmoll identified affinities with Thracian and Phrygian, Arena noticed tentative connections with Greek, and others, such as Alessio and Lejeune, pointed towards Italic. Georgiev, on the other hand, revived the idea of Anatolian connections, specifically with Hittite, although Georgiev also puts Etruscan into the same language family as Hittite, an idea which is almost universally rejected. Now, it is interesting that amongst academics and researchers, there seems to be a consensus opinion that Elymian belongs to the Indo-European language family. So for brevity's sake, I'm going to assume that today, and I'm not going to explore other options, for example, that it might be related to some pre-Indo-European language of Sicily. And to be honest, after my exploration in all things Elymian, it's hard to say what's more surprising. To be able to find an area of Indo-European linguistics where all researchers and academics appear to agree, that is, that Elymian is an Indo-European language, or the fact that scholars seemingly can be certain of Elymian's heritage based on such a vanishingly small corpus. That being said, I do actually think there is enough evidence concerning the morphological status of Elymian to be able to consider it as an Indo-European language. So let's start by taking a look at the vowel systems in Elymian. Some scholars have cast doubt on a potential relationship between Elymian and Anatolian due to the presence of an O and A vowel in Elymian, whereas Anatolian traditionally was thought to only contain the A vowel. However, recent research has suggested that Proto-Anatolian might in fact have included distinct O and A vowels, and furthermore, researchers like Chlorkhorst have proposed a theory, and it's based on consistent spelling conventions observed in Hittite, that even Hittite might have preserved a difference between O and A vowels, and therefore that it's not just limited to the proto-language. There is some uncertainty regarding the phonological value of certain signs in the Elymian alphabet, particularly beta, and Elymian shows a preference for consonant-vowel and consonant-vowel sonorant structures. Of course, like many things, these ideas are still debated, but we shouldn't rule out a connection between Elymian and Anatolian just based on the vowel systems, as others have done. Given the fragmentary nature of Elymian texts, drawing conclusions about Elymian morphology is challenging, but not impossible. There is evidence for a nominative case, and there is evidence for a dative or genitive case ending in A or I, often in combination with the verb form emi, meaning I am. This structure is part of a well-known dedicatory style inspired by Greek traditions. For example, we see similar structures in Osco-Umbrian, such as Brutius essum, I belong to Brutus, or Ortaka emi, I am of Ortak, although the beginning part of this inscription is missing. Some argue that the verb form emi might actually be an Italic development. Elymian coins often feature the Greek genitive, like siasteon, while on coins bearing their native Elymian language, we see use of a dative plural ending like siestazib or siestaziv. Some scholars attribute this to evidence of a relationship with the Italic language family, but I remain somewhat sceptical. There's no doubt that the form represents some form of inflectional ending, be it the genitive or dative, but the evidence for an Italic connection is, in my opinion, lacking. The interpretation of the zib ending as a dative plural in Italic languages is based on the use of the Italic f suffix, as seen in the Oscan word puff or puffe in Umbrian. However, there is debate regarding the value of this sign, whether it's siestazib or si est as if, Elymian academic Marchesini cast doubt on the belief that the beta represented a fricative in Italic languages, suggesting it was a bilabial plosive instead. This calls into question the interpretation of the Italic dative plural ending. In my opinion, early academics like Kinch might have seen a potential connection between Elymian and the Anatolian languages or Armenian simply because they only had access to texts from coin legends. However, the modest expansion of the Elymian corpus and the discovery of the so-called speaking inscriptions with the verb form emi haven't necessarily done much more to help us pinpoint Elymian's place on the Indo-European tree. The lack of the necessary linguistic data makes it difficult to establish plausible connections. While Elymian may in fact have Anatolian connections, I can't necessarily find any compelling reasons to support or refute this theory, aside from what Thucydides wrote about the origin of the Elymians. Culturally, the Elymians were heavily influenced by Greek language and culture, but they also demonstrated instances where they didn't sell out wholesale, particularly in the grammar of their coin legends. While Greek had a substantial impact on the Elymian language and on the island of Sicily as a whole, the extent of this influence is challenging to ascertain. Many contemporary scholars lean towards an Italic connection, and it's certainly plausible, and to be honest, I'm more than willing to go along with the consensus opinion. However, similarities like I am verb form plus dative aren't necessarily indicative of a deeper linguistic relationship. It's entirely possible that Elymian borrowed these forms as some form of fashion. It's entirely possible, therefore, in my opinion, that Elymian forms its own unique branch on the Indo-European tree, particularly when we take into consideration this so-called dative plural ending zib. So it's been a really interesting past few days, having learnt about this potential connection between Elymian and the Anatolian language family. And it has given me opportunity and motivation to read about varieties of Indo-European that I wouldn't necessarily have been interested to learn or read about. Now, what I will say is that I'm far, far, far from being an expert in, for example, the Italic languages, Osco-Umbrian, for example. And that's where I would like to ask for the opinion of my viewers, because I know that I do have some very knowledgeable people that follow these videos. What's your opinion on the limited evidence that we have concerning Elymian language? Do you see any additional reasons why we might be able to attribute it to the Italic language family, aside from this dative ending and the verb form emi? Could it have a deeper connection with Greek? Or maybe there's some language that we haven't considered at all that it could show affinities to. But that concludes today's discussion. I'm sorry I couldn't give you any more concrete answers regarding Elymian. I guess we'll just have to wait and see if in the next few years we dig up something interesting that helps us get a better understanding of the morphology of Elymian, for example. However, I do hope you found this video interesting, and it was an honour to take a look at this mysterious and curious language with you. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll speak to you all very, very soon.